For an entire generation, people have experienced Star Wars the only way it's been possible, on the TV screen. But if you've only seen it this way, you haven't seen it at all.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
We've been waiting for you.
The force is strong here, even stronger than the coffee.
Hi, this is Chris Taylor, Deputy Editor of Mashable.com and author of How Star Wars Conquered the Universe. And you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. With Dan Z and Corey Clubb, this is the podcast you're looking for.
We are happy to welcome Chris Taylor of Mashable.com to join us for a book chat at Coffee with Kenobi. Chris's new book, How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, is coming out September 30th. It examines Star Wars' impact on culture, not just popular culture, but culture in general. We are honored to talk with Chris about this exciting new book. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. It's our pleasure. As we spoke a little bit before, we were first drawn to your book through Full of Sith, our great friends over there, and you've got this amazing concept about Star Wars, and we're just curious, how did your book, How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, come to light?
So it's been 2 years in the making at this stage, and it was inspired by a couple of things, mainly the sale of Lucasfilm to Disney, which made me realize, as I wrote an op-ed on Mashable about how this had given Star Wars a new lease on life, and I noticed that there had not been a single history of the whole of Star Wars. You know, there are those wonderful Lucasfilm making of books by J.W. Rinsler. You know, there are the biographies of Lucas, some of them more official and more accurate than others. But there would be nothing that just sort of covers the whole sweep of what we talk about when we talk about Star Wars. You know, including the fan culture, including the 501st, including the R2 builders, but sort of tying that in to a history of the entire franchise and how, you know, George got the idea in the first place and the sort of the tortured drafts it went through. I really, on top of everything else, you know, not to try to pack too much into one book, but I really wanted it to be something of a creativity manual that you could look at it and say, well, hey, you know, if those first few scribblings of the Journal of the Whills in 1973 can become a multi-billion-dollar franchise that spans the globe and everyone knows about, you know, what are the steps along the route? What can we learn from it as creative people? And how we can have, you know, not to say that everyone is going to sell their company to Disney for $4 billion, but, you know, maybe you can learn something from this book and take it away to your own creative life.
Yeah, the process of just how this all came to light, and I agree with you. I remember when Corey first broke the news to me, he sent me a text saying not only did Disney purchase Lucasfilm, but we're going to see new Star Wars films. And I agree with you. It was like adrenaline went through fandom in an impact that maybe is unprecedented since the success of the Clone Wars. So you've had a lot of amazing experiences when writing this book. Tell us about some of those experiences that you've had throughout this process.
So I should mention the other inspiration that was a little earlier than the Lucasfilm sale. And it sort of ties into one of the more interesting experiences I had. We discovered that someone at Mashable, I should say, I'm deputy editor of Mashable, we discovered that one of our features writers had never seen Star Wars. And we were sort of appropriately aghast at this notion. And we thought, well, what better opportunity? Because this was right around the 35th anniversary. I believe this was, that would have been 2012, earlier in 2012. Mm-hmm. And we decided we'll live blog it. We will make sure she doesn't see it. You know, don't go home and watch it now, but we'll sit her down. Her name is Christine. We sat her down in front of the movie and we live blogged it, and we had her tweet about interesting thoughts that she had throughout the movie. And what quickly came to light was that even though she hadn't actually seen it, even though she had been pilloried from her youth for not having seen this movie, she still knew an awful lot of it. I mean, it just looked familiar to her. You know, it looked like every other science fiction movie she'd seen since, because, of course, they all stole notions like the used universe. And she noticed that she realized she knew Darth Vader's costume because it was that kid in the Super Bowl ad. I think the same year.
Oh yes,
was wearing the costume. She recognized R2-D2 as a Pepsi machine from beneath the bleachers in her house.
That's great.
She had all these associations with it. And I was like, hang on a minute. So all these people who say that they haven't seen Star Wars, they really know a lot of stuff. I mean, Christine already knew the big reveal in Empire, even though she barely knew the names of the characters. She knew the word droid. I mean, so much of the stuff is filtered through into society. And so, the following year, I really, for May the 4th, 2013, I wanted to do a newbie screening. I wanted to test this on a large scale. And that's what we did with the collaboration of Lucasfilm and change.org, which is a wonderful website for petitions based here in San Francisco. And we tried to get as many newbies as we could, pack them in the same room, show them this movie, and also get a sense beforehand how much do they really know. And it turned out they all knew a lot. They all knew all the characters' names. They knew the big reveal, not just from the second movie, but from the third movie, about various parentages and sibling relationships. And I just, it started me down the path of thinking, is there anyone in the world who, even though they claim to have not seen Star Wars, has been untouched by it? And, it's funny. I should mention that maybe you're going to mention this later, but we're doing this podcast, or I'm doing this podcast from Burning Man. And
yes,
even here at a art festival in the middle of the Black Rock Desert, there's kind of a Star Wars vibe going on, and there are camps. There's the Black Rock Cantina camp.
Wow.
There's right next door to that. There's Cloud City camp. With a cutout of Lando.
That's fantastic.
There is. I just passed a day. So the city that Burning Man becomes is called Black Rock City, or BRC for short. I just saw a camp called BRC3PO. And I just traveling to this particular office I'm sitting in to do this podcast right now, I saw a Stormtrooper sculpture. I mean, so even here, this festival that celebrates decommodification and sort of looks askance at the regular world, even here, Star Wars is everywhere, and people love it, and there are, mass lightsaber battles. So, it's really that thing that sort of appeals to everyone, every generation. Everyone knows a little bit of it. So is there anyone who just hasn't been affected at all? And who are they, and where are they? And am I going to have to become an anthropologist to go to,
very much
New Guinea to find them? And so the nearest thing to that was a story that came along last year, and you guys may have heard of it. It was when the Navajo Nation Museum translated Star Wars into Navajo.
Yes.
Now, no other film had been translated into the Navajo language. This was the first. And I walked into the Navajo Nation Museum when I went to Window Rock, Arizona, to find out more about how this was made. And I wanted to ask the director of the museum, why did you choose Star Wars? And I walked in, and there was a whole shelf of Boba Fett figurines. And I was like, okay, I get it. He'd seen the original trilogy on VHS in his 20s. He loved it. He could quote it, until the cows come home. And so I watched it, and I went to that screening, and I was like, well, surely here, in the Navajo Nation, surely, there's a lot of poverty here. A lot of people don't necessarily have the same access to popular culture that we do. And there's also the elders who are very esteemed in Navajo culture. Basically the seniors, who a lot of them don't even speak English. So surely they won't have had any encounters with it. And, I tell this story at great length in the book, but I eventually found one guy after, I should say, the 501st walks into the screening. They'd driven from Gallup, and they'd driven from Salt Lake, I think, and combined forces and came trooping into the screening. And the crowd went nuts. I mean, I've never seen such a rapturous welcome for the 501st, even at, Celebration or a Comic-Con or anything like that. There were mothers pressing babies into Darth Vader's hands, saying, please let me take a picture. There were guys wanting to do the Vadering pictures. Mm-hmm. When that was a meme. And I was just despairing. I'm like, here I am, sort of the most remote place I could find for a new screening of Star Wars in America. And everyone just loves it already. And I finally found one guy who was actually a code talker in World War II. Wow. And he's 88 years old. And he lives in the mountains, doesn't have a television, sleeps under sheepskin. And he didn't know what the title of Star Wars meant. He wondered, does it mean the stars are at war? And I thought, well, this is amazing. I found the one man left in America who doesn't know anything about this movie. Yeah, and I sort of ran through all these names and then finally, this I shouldn't give too much away because this is a pretty good story in the book. But finally, there was something that he had actually seen. So even he was not pure. So I sort of think that we should start some sort of preserve for people who've genuinely not seen this movie.
That's right.
And even the few elders that I talked to at the end, even they sort of recognized it because it turned out that "May the Force be with you" is actually a literal word-for-word translation of a Navajo prayer.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. They literally picture it as kind of a force field of goodness that surrounds you and protects you from evil. So it's a fascinating sort of example of how George Lucas synthesized the Force out of many global religions and spiritualities.
It certainly is. And as much as, like you talked about, it really, there's nobody that you can find that hasn't had come in contact with it through media or through culture in some sort of way. But I guess I might counter, has Star Wars oversaturated media and our culture? Are we just drenched in it in every way possible? Do you think that by any chance?
I am starting to think that, yeah. I mean, maybe it's sort of confirmation bias because I've done so much research for this book and I've traveled around the world and I've seen it everywhere and I've seen, Yoda is advertising Vodafone in the UK. It's when you see Darth Vader throwing baseballs in Japan, that's kind of weird. I'm just like, wow, this is it's kind of at the stage where it's like famous for being famous, it's this very bizarre stage that I don't think any other story has gotten to. So it's fascinating for that reason. But I certainly did think this last May the 4th, the 2014 version. The 2013 version was pretty cute. The 2014 version, suddenly brands were jumping in all over the place. And I wrote another opinion piece for Mashable about this.
Wonderful.
Because I think I was particularly offended by was it Starbucks, where they just had pictures of two frappuccinos locking straws like they were lightsabers.
Oh, yeah.
And something, it was a bad copy line. It was something like, Luke, I am your frappuccino. I mean,
oh dear.
Really? You're just stretching this too far now.
Yeah, that is not punny, as we would say. And what you're introducing through this book, and I just finished a thesis not too long ago where I did a lot of research about thinking and critical thinking and how high school students kind of look at the world and how they come to the process. And you're introducing these incredible sociological, anthropological concepts, how Star Wars has permeated the zeitgeist of culture. And it's become something as ubiquitous as almost like the Bible or Shakespeare, which is incredible.
Oh, even more so, because, I mean, we all give lip service to having read Shakespeare, and, a lot of us have, but I'd be willing to wager a lot more of us have seen at least one of the Star Wars trilogies. It is this sort of universally understood story, and it is, I think it's because it is inoffensive to everyone.
Yes.
Because everyone sees themselves in the Rebel Alliance. And I think that was true in 1977, where sort of different areas of America saw themselves in the hero or in the rebels. Certainly I think, the Midwesterners saw themselves in Luke, the farm boy. I think there were certainly people in the South who heard rebels and sort of thought of their own history.
Right.
I think definitely a lot of Americans saw the fact that there were British accents like mine in the Empire as sort of this is a retelling of 1776.
Yes.
And then the British saw the the attack on the Death Star and recognized quite rightly that it was pretty much taken from Dam Busters and all the great war movies of that era, and was in fact photographed by the DP from the Dam Busters. So there was that connection as well. So everyone saw that little bit, and I think even if you look at Soviet newspapers from I think the release of Return of the Jedi, they start to talk about how America is actually the evil empire. Ronald Reagan as Darth Vader, so everyone wants to put their own spin on it. Nobody remembers, of course, that Lucas was making a Vietnam parable
right
when he started this. That definitely got lost in the midst of time. No one thinks of the Viet Cong when they look at the Ewoks, which perhaps they should do, because then they realize that they're more dangerous than they seem.
Fascinating. Yeah, there's a lot there that people would realize. Just chronologically, how things kind of paralleled what was going on in the world as Lucas was creating this masterpiece. So you've had these amazing experiences, and you've learned a lot about fandom through this process. What really stands out to you through your experiences in this book and fandom?
Fandom, Star Wars fandom in general, I think, is one of the most inclusive fandoms on the planet. Basically, the barrier to entry is, have you seen a Star Wars movie? That's it.
Yeah.
Or not even that. Technically, I guess there could be people in the club who call themselves Star Wars fans who've just read the novels. I don't think there are many people who fall into that category, but it's theoretically possible. I was worried when I started writing this that I would be plunging into a world of just extreme nerdiness that had many barriers to entry. You had to prove yourself as a fan. You had to, quote lines not just from the original Star Wars, but from Attack of the Clones. You had to get really obscure and know everything about the expanded universe. Absolutely not the case. I had this crazy notion I was going to read every expanded universe novel.
Oh my! Speaking of the Bible, yeah.
Yeah, right. And then I looked at how many there were and how poorly most of them are rated, like even among Star Wars fans. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to take the best, sample some Matthew Stover and some Zahn and
a buffet of Star Wars literature.
Exactly. Just a taster plate, a smorgasbord. A smorgasbord of Star Wars. But it is really inclusive. And you're sort of allowed entry. And, when I went to Celebration Europe in Essen, Germany last year, I got that sense as well. It has to be this inclusive culture because it is global. And you don't necessarily share a common language with all the Star Wars fans that you're talking to, let alone, common theories on Mara Jade. So there is a certain sort of baseline, lowest common denominator approach, but also you can sort of throw in references, and you can drill down as deeply as you want to with Star Wars. You can get as geeky as you like, and there's tons of source material to back you up, and you can get into an extremely geeky conversation about what constitutes canon. And of course, we all talked about that a lot last year when what constituted canon changed. I guess that was this year, wasn't it? But at the same time, you can just look at the cool stormtroopers.
That's true. Now, you talked about, Star Wars being just, it seems like it's I don't want to call it the biggest franchise or the biggest fandom out there. But,
can. It's better than Twilight.
This is true. But what's separating?
Certainly longer lasting.
That's true.
That's the test, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It truly is, and it penetrates us even to today. And we talked about the new movies coming out, and it gets exciting for fans. But what separates Star Wars from other genres, and that helped helped it endure all this time?
I think, I don't know. There are a number of things here. I think that it's a very peculiar and specific mindset that you have to get into to sort of be in that Star Wars realm in your head, because on the one hand, it's sort of loose and fun and doesn't take itself too seriously. And, it is definitely space fantasy. I mean, the whole chapter of this book, after the introduction, is about just getting your head around space fantasy. How's it different from science fiction? Where does it go back to? Basically, traced it back to Jules Verne versus H.G. Wells, where Wells was much more the space fantasist, where, you just don't care about the science of it. You just want to have fun with it. And that's obviously where Lucas came down in the debate. He didn't like the serious science fiction, or at least, he liked it for THX, but then decided to return to his roots and go back to the Flash Gordon side of things for Star Wars. But it's that sense of playing fast and loose with science. Of just, we can have sound in space and all of that. And just funny. I mean, the crucial difference with the fourth draft of Star Wars, the reason that's the one we remember, and the others sort of all, none of them worked. And, we're so glad that George was a perfectionist about that, waited till they got the right draft to actually film the thing. But the fourth draft was of course hilariously funny, because you have all these jokes coming in from Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, who changed 30% of the script just to punch it up and make it funnier. Write that kind of funny, snappy dialogue that George always admitted that he's just no good at writing. So it's funny, but not funny in a way that we're sort of used to in our cynical, post-Monty Python modern world, where you're sort of sneering at things and you're winking at the audience and you're saying, "Hey, audience, isn't this a stupid space fantasy film?"
That is a fantastic turn of phrase. I love that. That's great. Sorry to interrupt, but that was beautiful.
Thank you. No, it really struck me very definitely. You go along, you can laugh with it, you can have a good time, but it's never going to reduce your level of immersion into that universe. So you may come for the comedy if you're not generally a geeky science fiction fan kind of guy. You'll enjoy, in the same way that we enjoy with Guardians of the Galaxy. Very funny movie. But at the same time, this incredible mythological depth. So come for the comedy, stay for the world building.
Absolutely. You mentioned Guardians of the Galaxy, and that was on my mind definitely as this 2014, and Guardians was a huge hit this year, and obviously it plays right off of, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, all those great films that we've taken from. So how would you compare, Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014 compared to Star Wars 1977?
I mean, obviously, you can never really have another Star Wars, right? That was a once in a lifetime cultural phenomenon, and it was just because the studios so completely misread what the American public wanted that they were blindsided by this. Now, of course, everyone knows we've been through so many Hobbits and Lords of the Rings and so much piracy on the Caribbean that we know that the audience is looking for that kind of fun time. But back in '77, it was a revelation. But what's weird, I mean, I have a chapter on sort of Star Wars clones and the many movies that attempted to take the Star Wars formula and just botched it so badly. And I think the essential thing was they didn't get this sense of humor, that it just sort of had to be snappy and witty and help immerse you in it. But Guardians of the Galaxy gets that, and it sort of makes me feel like it's really bizarre that they took nearly 40 years, the studios took nearly 40 years to realize that was the formula that they should have been doing all along. And yet, and it was still surprising to people that Guardians was a hit, because they were saying, no big name actors, it's based on an obscure Star Wars, Marvel franchise. But of course, Star Wars had no name actors and at the time, and was not even, didn't even have the prop of being based on an obscure franchise. It was based on Flash Gordon, which had been last on the screen in 1940. So so it's really weird that we sort of had that cultural amnesia, and I think it's because studio executives, as William Goldman famously said, nobody knows anything, and they just didn't get what was a big hit about this film. So.
Which is just perfect, really. When you look at how far it's gone, and you think about Star Wars' contributions to culture, and some of the stories you've told have just been tantalizing audiences for experiencing your book. But in your opinion, Star Wars and culture, what do you think Star Wars teaches us about our culture that makes it so appealing?
Well, certainly you have that sense of right and wrong. But you also, I mean, it's almost a manual for living, right? I mean, certainly those of us who were kids for the original trilogy, you know, we all sort of identified with Luke a little bit because it's so easy as a kid to be tempted by anger and just all these horrible feelings, you know, that is very well described by the phrase the dark side.
Yes.
And going to the dark side. And for the first time, kids had that language to talk about that. And they had this, you know, they had a little green guy telling them right from wrong and telling them not to give in to their anger and not to rush off too hastily. And they saw what the result was when Luke rushes off and doesn't finish his training. I mean, I'm sure that a generation of kids stayed in school because of that, you know. It's interesting. You can't draw necessarily too much of a correlation from this, but there was. So 1978 was the peak for marijuana usage among high school kids, and it sort of dropped ever after that, which is interesting for two reasons. I think, firstly, you know, first of all, they were kind of, you know, that helped the ticket sales for the original Star Wars, but also perhaps it sort of, you know, it helped this turnaround in society where we were sort of starting to look at ourselves and think of ourselves as Jedi and kind of look for the better angels of our nature, perhaps. You know, you can draw too much from that one statistic, but it just sort of feels like there was, at the time that Star Wars came out, there was a cultural shift, and maybe it was following that pack, or maybe it was helping to lead it. But all of a sudden, you know, you have, in the year that the second Star Wars movie comes out, you have a California governor who sort of has that sort of same uncomplicated good versus evil going on in his mind, being elected president.
Wow.
You know, and a lot of reviewers noted this at the time. It wasn't just that Star Wars was kind of, you know, the good old, you know, serial era good versus evil. It was also that it sort of gave America this uncomplicated view of the world. And the view of the world in the 70s was so complicated. You know, and rightly so. We do live in a very complicated world, but it was, you know, we'd been dragged down by Vietnam and we just didn't have a sense of ourselves as being, you know, a good country necessarily anymore. And I think that, you know, this sort of rousing tale of, you know, brave fighter pilots taking on the giant Death Star and defeating it through their wits and their spirituality and their ability to, you know, see through the technical flaws of this thing. I think that really resonated with an entire culture. And I think we're still sort of feeling the reverberations of that today. And it's, at a certain level, talking about all Star Wars is like fish talking about water, right? It surrounds us so much. We can have a very hard time trying to figure out what the effect was. But yeah, I think the return to morality was a really big deal. And it was sort of, it managed to inculcate this message very cleverly in a way that no other movie, and I think I would include books in this, no other book has managed to do that. You know, either you see a self-help book that is clearly advertising itself as a self-help book, or you see a novel and maybe it has a few interesting lessons in there for you, but they're often, you know, pretty complex. But if they're trying to teach you lessons, you can usually smell it, right? You can usually smell it from a few pages away.
Didactic.
Exactly, very didactic. Or as I think Anthony Trollope used to say about some lessons he was inserting in some of his novels, he said they can smell the rhubarb beneath the jam. Yes. Which I think is a great phrase. And Star Wars somehow manages to just throw those lessons into this whole package. It doesn't feel as if it was just shoved in there. It doesn't feel like, you know, George Lucas is wagging his finger at us and telling us to not give in to hate. You know, it's clearly being told through the characters, but just, you know, indelible in the minds of an entire culture.
Well, Corey, is it possible through this conversation to be even more excited about this book?
No, not at all. I'm watering at the mouth. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Very good. And I've one quick question. You've sitting here and you've just sparked my fandom a whole new level. And I'm sitting here thinking...
And you were on a Star Wars podcast, Corey.
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm sitting here thinking, like, how can I get Chris to come over to my house and tell my wife to watch these movies?
I was thinking the same thing. Absolutely. There's just so much to it. It's not just a couple of guys sitting around talking about lightsabers. There's just so much about how it permeates history, culture, society, and you have somehow encapsulated it in an educated way that I would venture to say is pedagogical in nature. So I applaud you for that, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I just really, I wanted to write, it's sort of, it's so arrogant to say the definitive work, but I really wanted to just sort of, I respect the source material so much. I really wanted to nail it and tell the truth of this whole thing and how it took off. And just, wherever the truth lay, whether that truth pisses off Lucasfilm or it, kind of makes people think that I'm a shill for Lucasfilm, I don't mind. I'll take whichever. Because, I think there are points in the book that do both. But I really just tried to get that sense of what is accurate here. And, there is, for an example, a chapter on how to be a Jedi that spends the first half of the chapter sort of basically debunking the whole Jedi census thing. Yeah. You remember back, maybe a decade ago, I guess this started when started in New Zealand, was the first to have Jedi on its census. And it all started as an email prank, basically. And, it just continued as a prank throughout. And you look at the towns in the UK where the largest number of Jedi were reported, they were all university towns. This was a student prank, and it was, very good one, clever one, widespread one, shows the popularity of Star Wars, yes, but didn't necessarily mean that people wanted to be a Jedi sort of religiously. But they did. I mean, there was a wonderful study that I quoted by an academic named Jennifer Porter, who did a study at Star Wars weekends at Disney World, where she went up and handed out questionnaires and got people to talk about, do you feel like you're a Jedi? Do you follow the principles of being a Jedi? And generally people do. But, she discovered they don't. First of all, they're Jedi realists, she says. They layer this concept of the Force over their already established religion. It's sort of an enhancement to that. And it's an enhancement even for agnostic and atheist people too.
Which is a whole other conversation. I mean, we could spend hours on that.
But one respondent ends by saying, I think people they don't think that deeply about it. They just want cool lightsabers.
Yes, very true. Uh-huh.
And that's my segue into, the second half of the chapter is basically talking about, I went to the Golden Gate Knights, who are my local lightsaber teaching workshop, and spent a number of workshops with those guys trying to figure out how to choreograph lightsaber fights. And then that was my segue to talk about, the famous Star Wars Kid video, which, if you believe some statistics, has been viewed as many times as all of the Star Wars movies put together.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, so that's another huge part of the culture we get into. But I really, the whole point being that chapter, I just wanted to get at the truth about what is it about the Jedi that fascinate us, and how have they layered themselves onto our culture. And it is, to a certain extent, it's this notion of the Force. It's less about calling yourself a Jedi, but a lot of it is about how completely cool lightsabers are.
Yeah, and that's what is so wonderful about Star Wars, is that you can take it from an intellectual level, you can take it from a story level, or you can just enjoy the visual, auditory splendor that is a Star Wars experience through film. So you have been so gracious with your time, and as we said before, and this is certainly not lip service, you have just created something that is so fascinating. Similar to how Paul McDonald, when he looked at the prequels to Star Wars, to the Star Wars heresies, taking Star Wars and kind of pulling the lens back and showing the intellectual value and the sociological implications of this is certainly not to be missed. And so thank you for adding another layer to Star Wars for all of us as fans. We really appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. I really sort of, every chapter of the book, you may sort of notice this kind of straining against the limitations of the chapter, where I could easily bust out like Incredible Hulk and talk for hours on each single chapter. I think the fact that it had to be constrained kind of helps the whole book move along. I definitely wanted it to have that sense of speed that.
Oh yes,
because there is a lot of academic writing about Star Wars, I'm sure you guys know, and it can veer into academic language a little too much, and I definitely didn't want to do that. I wanted this to be the book about Star Wars you can give to your grandmother, and she'll suddenly understand the 501st.
Finally,
and maybe even a list.
There you go.
Now that I really want to see. I want to see a Granny Legion.
Well, Chris, before we let you go, and we certainly hope to have you on again. There's so many different things to look at through Star Wars, and how Star Wars conquered the universe is certainly an amazing place to do that. But before we let you go, what is your favorite Star Wars movie?
Gosh, I would say before this book it was Empire, because that's sort of the classic answer. And I think Empire, funny, I remember the Empire comic strips so much because when I went, they were great. They were so good. I forget the artist on those, but famous comic book artist, and the on-screen version was so redolent of what I'd read in the comic first that I was just incredible. I don't think any other movie has been that sort of, had that sort of dark comic book approach to it. So Kirshner did incredible work on that. Having said that, the more that I've studied Episode 4, the original Star Wars, the more I see just how completely, insanely brilliant of an achievement that was. And we wouldn't have an Empire Strikes Back without it. We wouldn't have any of this without it if it hadn't been just right. And it was so complicated to get right. I mean, it's such this sort of weird ensemble structure to it, right? I mean, and Lucas's friends complained to him about this at the time. They're like, I don't get it. Who's the hero? We go from the droids to Leia to the droids to then they're down on the planet, and then we meet Luke 15 minutes in. Why haven't we met him earlier? So on paper, it's completely confusing. Everyone is leading you to someone else. Luke leads you to, or R2, I guess, leads you to Obi-Wan, who leads you to Han Solo, who leads you back to the Death Star. And you can see why Fox was, even Alan Ladd Jr. was looking askance at this, because on paper, it could have been a disaster. But the fact that it comes together so seamlessly and holds up so well, and you can watch it hundreds of times and still either see something new or get that same thrill again. So I have to give Episode 4 some love. I have to say that having written this book has changed my mind about which is the best movie, and it's Episode 4.
Excellent.
Was it Al Williamson, by the way?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. I just thought of that.
We could double check that.
So, Chris, your favorite Star Wars character?
Wow. Again, I think the writing of this book has changed that, because I did not know when I wrote it, or when I started writing it, that Lucas has R2 pegged for a particular kind of fame. That he was telling people on the set of Revenge of the Sith that the whole story of Star Wars, future episodes included, is actually being told by R2-D2 to the keeper of the Journal of the Worlds, which I think is such an amazing framing device. And it made me think about the whole notion that actually, R2 never got his brain wiped in Episode 3, unlike 3PO. So, or we don't see that happen explicitly. So that could explain why he's so willful at the start of Episode 4 about finding Obi-Wan. He's never wrong. He always knows the right thing to do. And there was this great when they relaunched Star Tours at Disneyland, and Lucas and Bob Iger had this whole bit where they came out as Jedi and met Darth Vader and gave him a warning. And Lucas's only line in that whole bit was, "R2 will know what to do."
How prescient.
Yeah, because you you could say, hey, I really love the Jedi, or Obi-Wan's my favorite character, or, I love Yoda, but they're all flawed. They're all seriously flawed, and they lied. And, the prequels complicated everything there. But the prequels did not complicate the simplicity and the beauty of R2-D2.
Good point. So, favorite line of dialogue or film moment?
Oh, gosh.
We want to make this as difficult as possible.
Oh, I don't know. That is a really difficult choice. Maybe it's Cloud City. I'm just going to say Cloud City in general just seemed, and maybe this is watching it as a child, but it just seemed like such a magical place. But sort of filled with that scary, exciting sense of foreboding. Something going wrong, and the capture of Han and Leia, the near disintegration of 3PO, and all that stuff going on in these corridors. So I still today, get chills watching the Cloud City scene. So,
well, that probably demonstrates it as well as anything that there's real peril, there's real cost in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, they go there. Just everything goes wrong. Everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong without killing our heroes. So that was masterful.
So, Chris, if you collect, what is your favorite collectible that you own? I had many Star Wars figures from the late 70s, early 80s, and the funny thing is, I'd say the favorite ones are the ones I've lost. Is that weird? I don't know. Not at all.
I can see that, yeah.
I've thought about them so much. I have this sort of mental inventory if I know exactly that I lost pretty sure I lost a pig guard. Definitely lost an Emperor's guard. Somewhere in, school at the age of 10. And I did this really dumb thing that I kind of regret to this day, which is I gave away the very first Star Wars figure I ever received, which was a snowtrooper.
Wow.
And I gave it away even because I thought stormtroopers were cooler than snowtroopers, or at least I felt I should have a stormtrooper first. But then I acquired a stormtrooper anyway, and I remember trading the snowtrooper for a second stormtrooper that was sort of rattier and dirtier and more beaten up than the first. I traded it with some kid whose name I don't remember anymore. And I'm like, why did I do that? I had this pristine snowtrooper figure, and it was my first. It should have that sort of resonance. And I actually talked about this to Daryl DePriest at Hasbro, and sort of the evangelist for the Star Wars line. And he was like, no, that's exactly what I would have done. He sort of whipped out his phone and he showed me his dioramas that he has back home of hundreds of stormtroopers surrounding the Millennium Falcon from the Death Star. He pointed out that the stormtrooper is actually the second best-selling character after Vader for Hasbro, and it's because you need legions of them. Mm-hmm. You need at least two, as I discovered as a kid. You need at least two for any sort of serious action figure big plot to go forward.
Sure.
So.
Well, always two there are, unless it's Hasbro and they're trying to make more of them. And actually, that makes sense too when you think about all the different iterations of Stormtroopers we've seen. And heck, I love the Stormtroopers, and the 501st certainly doesn't hurt the popularity either.
It really doesn't, and of course we have 501st action figures now that Hasbro.
That's right.
Which thrilled Albin Johnson no end.
Especially I think they first premiered in episode 3, didn't they?
They did, and Albin had no idea about that. None of the Legion had any idea that was going to happen until they received from, I think, a 501st member in Japan, sent them a figure, a pre-production, or at least pre-production in the US figure, and it was all Japanese characters. It was one of those clone troopers with the blue stripe falling behind Darth Vader.
That was a hard action figure to find, too.
Yeah, and it just had the number 501, and that was the 501st first tip-off that they'd been immortalized as figures, because Lucasfilm had never told them.
I can't wait till that happens to Coffee with Kenobi.
We'll see. I'm sure in episode 7 we're going to see an old hologram of Kenobi. And he'll be sitting with a cup of synth coffee or something.
Right. I'm probably more likely to turn into a Smurf, but that would be great. So, what particular messages or themes about the Star Wars saga resonate or speak to you? This is almost like when we asked Steve Sansweet what his favorite collectible was. Right. Asking you this.
For sure, that made Steve's head explode. But, how can you choose among your children? Exactly. So, sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, sure. What particular messages or themes about the Star Wars saga resonate or speak to you?
I think that the sense of fun and playfulness about it, the sense of storied history, but history conveyed in a very sort of quick and mysterious way, so that the majority of what has been, quote unquote, written about Star Wars, if you include the writings of the saga we've made in our own heads, the stories we told after Empire of how Han gets out the carbonite, that to me is the thing that resonates about Star Wars, that it lets us create our own stories in our head. The more mysterious you make it, the better. I discovered a really weird coincidence in writing this book. The number of words that are used to describe the Force by Obi-Wan Kenobi in episode 4. 28 words. Exactly the same as the number of words that Boba Fett speaks in all of the movies.
No kidding. Including special edition? Well, I guess he doesn't talk in a new
He
book,
does,
does he?
yeah. It does include the word arg. I mean, there are definitely words he gets to say, but you've got to include arg from Return of the Jedi. That's the 28th word.
Perfect.
And so, take that together, you get this real sense of brevity, right? Brevity is important. That's what Lucas learned with his first 4 drafts. The more that you cut out of it, the better it gets. And the more mysterious it is, and the more action and adventure takes place in the heads of the audiences. I mean, how many of us wondered about the Clone Wars for years because of that brief mention in episode 4. It fired so many imaginations, and it was just a throwaway line. So I hope that we get more of that. I hope that episode 7 raises more questions than answers, because I think that sense of wonderment, that sense of mystery, of just being sucked into the universe because you want to know the answers, but you don't want to know. That's the best thing about Star Wars for me, and that's what I hope continues.
That's excellent. And you've talked so much here. We're so excited for the book coming out September 30th. You're on Mashable.com. Where else can folks and fans pick up your book and get in contact with you?
Best place to get the book is to go to HowStarWarsConquered.com. And we have a buy tab there. And if you go to that, you will see that you have your choice of buying it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or via independent booksellers. So we really want to give a wide variety of options to you. So that's the best place to go. As for me, you can always follow me on Twitter. I'm Future Boy. And yes, you can follow my adventures on Mashable.com.
Excellent. You've already got numerous reviews about the book I'm looking at here, and one that sticks out to me is Simon Pegg.
Yes, I was so happy to get Simon on this. But if you read his autobiography, which is wonderfully titled "Nerd Do Well," there's like 3 chapters of that book that are devoted to Star Wars. He was obsessed with the original movie, and he obviously was not a fan of the prequels. We know this from watching Space. So there's a whole other chapter about seeing Phantom Menace the first time, and then what George Lucas supposedly said to him at the premiere of Revenge of the Sith, which is a whole other controversial area. Allegedly, he said, don't get stuck making the same movie in 30 years' time. So there's that. But no, so Simon is obviously a huge fan and really loves to talk about it. I think he took film theory in college, and that was so he loves to talk about the wider cultural resonance of film. So for him, this was obviously right up his alley.
That's fantastic. Well, Chris, it has certainly been a pleasure to share a cup of coffee with you. We look forward to hopefully doing that with you and the gang from Full Sith at Celebration Anaheim next year, which will be fantastic.
Yeah,
that'll be great. That'll be awesome.
We should talk again. Maybe a little later on when the book is out. We could talk a little bit more about it. I'd love to get your opinions.
That'd be great.
We would love to. Yeah. Once we tear through this thing, and we certainly will. I'm sure it's going to open up a whole lot of different conversations and questions, which we look forward to asking you about and talking with. So, Chris Taylor, thank you again so much for your time and for this amazing book. We will have a link to it in our show notes. You'll be able to purchase it through our website as well. How Star Wars Conquered the Universe by Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor, thank you so much for being on Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you, Corey and Dan. This has been awesome. Great talking to you.
Chewie, get us out of here!
If you would like to respond to our question of the show, have a comment, or just want to say hello, send us an email or MP3 at feedback@coffeewithkenobi.com. Or if you have a specific question or comment for either of us individually, email us at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com or coreys@coffeewithkenobi.com, or visit us at coffeewithkenobi.com and click on the Contact Us section, or comment on one of the stories featured on the site. If you enjoy the show, please write a review in iTunes. You can also like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, as well as keep up to date on our Twitter feed at twitter.com/coffeewithkenobi. You can also find us on Tumblr at coffeewithkenobi.tumblr.com. If you enjoy the jazz music, download the album Eye to Eye by Steve Torok on iTunes.
Give the evacuation code signal.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.